Good morning. So, I have a topic today that I wanted to address. I've had a few people actually approach me, and this has actually been over the last couple of months, saying, Jeff, I'm getting a lot of psychic hits that we're going to have, a lot of trouble here, and that the world could potentially, go into a disastrous place. Well, what I think a lot of psychics are seeing is the Saturn Neptune conjunction. Now, these conjunctions with the outer planets are exceedingly powerful. Every time they happen, we get something in the world that happens. So, I have some psychic friends and clients who are really accurate, so they often see things different than in astrology because they get messages, but you still have to interpret, just like in astrology, what a probable outcome would be. So one of the concerning ones that came across my desk was, hey, California is going to fall into the ocean and quite potentially the West Coast, from what I've heard on another person mention. And what's interesting about that is, that's, kind of concerning because I live in California and on the West Coast. We live north of Los Angeles, about 30, 35 miles. So we're not right down in there, but we're up north. So that, well, not only is that a germane question, but it's a germane question for me, my family, and friends, right? Because if the entire coast of California was to slide into the ocean, that would be no small earthquake. That would be catastrophic. So, of course, what did I do? I cast an interrogation. What is an interrogation? Interrogation is always picking a time to literally have your question answered. So it's not a birth chart. It's not anything other than when consciousness becomes ripe for a question, you ask it. And it's one of the most ancient and mysterious types of astrology, because when you really think about it, it's the birth of consciousness or a question, in other words, what you want to know. So I cast it, and the eastern horizon, of course, collectively becomes where I'm at. And also all the people that would be here. The fourth house is the land. And not to get into how astrology works, though a lot of people are very interested in it. I looked at it and I thought, wow, there's going to be chaos. There's going to be some trouble, that's for sure. But it didn't seem like the entire state of California, which, by the way, there's almost 40 million people here. It's like, I think the last census was 39,500,000 people. And that's a guesstimate. And of course, with all the immigration stuff that's gone on, we really don't know how many people are here, but there's a lot of people here. They say it's the most populous state in the union. And of course, if you go up into Oregon and, and Washington and all that, there's a lot of people. But the Pacific Rim is really been active lately. There's no question. There's been an increase in volcanoes. There's also been volcanic activity all around the Pacific Rim, and also earthquakes. So, it got my attention. So I would tend to say no, but I would also tend to say, for me, something big is going to happen. Will the West Coast fall into the ocean? I tend to think not, based on the astrology. And believe me, if it looked that way, I'd probably be getting out of Dodge here, because I've been in earthquakes and they're powerful. I was in the 1994 earthquake, and I got to tell you, it was a roller coaster ride. You drive 3 blocks and the streets drop, 4 or 5 feet, and then you drive another block and everything was fine. So these are called very torsional waves that go on these surface earthquakes. If you got one big enough to make the West Coast slide in, that would be a whole nother situation. That would be probably potentially off the Richter scale as they measure it. So it would be pretty substantial. And I thought, if I remember right, the earthquake in San Francisco in the early 1900s, I think it was a 9.1 they measured it at, 9.2. Someone might know the exact details, but it was up there. And I think that was so devastating because of all the brick. So back to this question, and will there be disaster? I do get that this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in February, and this is what I think the psychics are sensing, because one psychic had actually cited February 18th. I did have someone else also say that they saw things coming. And it's interesting because mundane astrology is just looking at what the energies celestially are on the world. And this is happening both in the tropical and sidereal zodiac. So remember, tropical is 24 degrees difference from sidereal. And we have a lot of astrologers who are staunch siderealists and others who are staunch tropicalists. Again, I observed them both, and the Egyptians, all the way back to the Chaldeans, also observed them both from what I can discern from all the translations. And what does this mean? Well, it's in a water trine. Plus, modern astrologers will say Neptune rules Pisces, and this is happening in Pisces. But interestingly enough, I always follow the sidereal angelic degrees. And this is happening in this very 6th degree of Pisces in the sidereal zodiac. And when I look up the angelic degree, which I find to be exceedingly accurate, this is a book you can't get anymore. I wish you could, but it was actually written by an Indian Vedic astrologer. He put together a bunch of different ancient fixed stars for each degree of the zodiac. And if we go back into the medieval times, they were really into angels. And they knew that archangels, angels, spirits, and intelligences were involved in every celestial body. Even though if you say that to an astrophysicist, they will probably call the guys in the white suits or at least waltz you to the door. But I absolutely believe this is true because of the accuracy of it. Well, this is happening in a very interesting degree called the degree of attempting subterfuge. And this is more what I see. And again, I hope I'm right, because if I'm not right, you won't be hearing from me anymore if the West Coast falls in. But, and of course, that's in February. But this degree is actually the metaphor for robbers and pirates attempting to do subterfuge or evil things. And this is more what I see. And this is interesting because when you look at the politics in the United States, at least right now, what are we seeing? We're seeing all this money is going to be released because of that big new beautiful bill right in when? January. And we also have some really powerful energies coming up in January. First off, we have the long coming Sun-Mars conjunction. That happens on the 8th of January, which is, a week after the new year, just a little bit over. Plus, this December, we have the Mars-Saturn square. Now, these things happen all the time. This is not an extremely rare occurrence. But I find the outer planets, when they conjunct, square, oppose, they really cause big changes in the world. And this is Saturn, which rules structures, and it's Neptune, which rules subterfuge, subconscious, psychic, and oftentimes confusing things that no one can put their fingers on. I cannot tell you how many clients I've had over the years who've had hard Neptune aspects to the sun or Mars, and the doctors would run test after test after test. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then as soon as the aspect got over with, boom, everything went away. So Neptune is a very weird, elusive planet. Even the astrophysicists will tell you it's so dense in its gas, in its atmosphere, they can barely get in there and probe it. And of course, Neptune is so far out there. It's the second to the last planet that, is considered a planet. Of course, Pluto's been moved in and out now, right? They actually demeaned it from being a planet. Now they voted it back in from last I heard. So all I can tell you is from the observation of these energies, astronomically, they really, really line up. In fact, here, I'm going to do something. I'm going to show you. Let me go to my share screen, and you can actually see this right on the screen, how prominent this conjunction is. If I jump over here. Now, this is the sidereal conjunction of February 20th. And take a look at the alignment here. I know it's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but you can see the alignment here. You've got all these planets here in what many astrologers today would call a bowl. See, it's a bowl because it arcs right here. But notice we also got Jupiter here, and we've also got K2 and Jupiter and Uranus are right here. So it is all in this 180 degree arc. It's actually a little less than that. It's probably closer to about a maybe a 170-degree arc. If you look at where Jupiter is, all the way to Pluto down here, you can see where I'm drawing here. So it is a tight alignment. And I'll never forget, back in 1994, I was actually out here in Los Angeles doing a music project. And I had said to my girlfriend at the time, I said, this really, really looks like this is a tight alignment, and it could be very, very dangerous. And of course, we had the 1994 earthquake, and it was pretty intense. But this one is not quite as tight as what we had in 1994. It's tight, but not that tight. The biggest one, and you can see it here, it's very small on the screen, is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Now, I stand corrected. It's actually happening the very first degree of Aries in the tropical zodiac. And that's right. I had mentioned that before. It's happening in the 6th degree of Pisces in the sidereal. So I said that wrong before. So, and I had also mentioned, I went back through different models, and to the critics of the tropical zodiac, I have to tell you, I think it's the denser layer to the physical Earth plane. And what I find here is the Egyptians had things called the bounds. You can see down here, it's very hard to read on a small screen, but if you got a big screen TV or you can zoom in, you can see this is called the essential Egyptian dignities, or it's attributed at least to the Egyptians. And there are so many astrologers who studied in Alexandria, Egypt. There's so many texts I've been studying that are being translated where this goes back to 600-700 BC. Very, very advanced cohesive astrology. And of course, many people have heard of Ptolemy. Well, they always made a big deal about planets conjuncting, especially the outer planets like Neptune and Saturn, in the very first, what they call Egyptian bounds. See, they're called bounds. They have what they call 5 of uneven bounds in all of the signs. We find the same analysis techniques in Vedic astrology, where they divide the signs into very complex divisions, and they have a lot of meaning. There's a lot of secrets to them. And this is happening in the very first bound of tropical Aries. That has not happened, from the best that I can see, for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And some people say it's 11 or 12,000. I haven't had the time to go back in and do deep research. One chat GTP search that I did said it hasn't happened for over 26,000 years. Another one said it was 12,000. So let's just suffice it to say that it hasn't happened in a long time. Any way you cut it, 11 or 26,000 years is a lot longer than any of us have been around in these bodies. I'll say that. So this is significant. And I will give the psychics, I think, a lot of credit here, because they're seeing a disruption in the energetic field of the solar system. And I have to say, I would agree. But I tend to get through the interrogation that this is much more leaned towards subterfuge, or something violent is going to happen. And this might fit the bill. Look at what we've got going on here in not only the politics, but also in the global stage. Elon Musk just got sued for, I think, $140 million because the empire is striking back and not wanting him to not comply to the First Amendment rights of speech. In other words, they want him to report everything about everybody and what they're saying on social media. This is an encroachment onto everyone's personal rights. And I think we're about to see a lot of things. I've been mentioning this whole year. 2026 to me, and I'm going to get into this a lot more. I'll be on Veritas and a number of other shows that have invited me on for the first of the year. Plus, I'll be doing a special on the first of the year. And I can tell you, I see 2026 as a highly eventful year. A lot of stuff going on. We've got Uranus, again, as I had mentioned. It's now retrograde, but it's going to go direct, and it's going to go back over Alcyon and into the Pleiades a little bit further, and then it comes out of it. Every time this happens, about every 84 to 86 years, we get disruption and chaos in the world. And it also has a way of disrupting tyranny and also, you could say, totalitarianism, which is a little bit of what's been happening. If anybody's been paying attention here, look, Europe, they're saying, could literally be destroyed. And it's interesting because Trump and Musk and others, since this big thing happened, they're actually calling for the EU to be disbanded. And this goes back to that little book I had talked about a while ago called The Tower of Babel. Very interesting read if anybody wants to read it. It's about the banking systems and the owners and the controllers, who they don't like anyone talking. I'm sure I'm censored because of this. But I can tell you, follow the money. And this is exactly what we're seeing. So I'm seeing much more things of this nature. Violence, disruption, and kickback in the United States, at least, from, I think you're going to see a hugely increased extrication of illegal immigrants. And whether you agree or disagree with that, that's going to happen, in my opinion. And it's handwriting on the wall. They've got people lined up around the block right now wanting to become ICE agents, and the money's going to be there to do it. And you're going to see a pushback on this. Also, I think we're going to see some serious indictments. Now, I know everybody says, yeah, but Comey and Lolita James got thrown out the window. I'm not talking about just those two. I think you're going to see the dominoes fall, and it's coming. And it's taking a long time because of the legal system. You ever get involved in the legal system, it can take years to resolve simple issues that could be done with a handshake. So I always say the legal system is the finest system money can buy. It's full of procedure and everything else. And, it's what we have as human beings. It's, I guess, better than Hatfields and the McCoys, but it's still, it's a very arduous system. And it's all proceduralized. And this is what we're witnessing right now. And I think you're going to see a heck of a lot of kickback come in out of that. So I don't have a lot of time today. And I was busy. I did another radio show on Wednesday. That's why I didn't come on. Plus I had clients. But I wanted to address this because I thought, this is very concerning. So what am I saying here? I am saying, yes, we're going to see subterfuge and trouble is what I see. And I would not be surprised, and this is the big one, if we see a lot more opening up about extraterrestrial stuff. There's a great, I wanted to put it up today, but I didn't have time. But I just watched a great documentary. It was called The Coming of Age, and absolutely amazing. And it's all these military people, pilots, government people, and black ops, as well as intelligence people coming forward and saying, look, we've been lied to. Not only are we not alone, they've been reverse engineering this technology and capturing alien, or you could say even terrestrial beings, for probably the last 80 years plus. So it's nothing new. And if you go back into the medieval times, even back to many people suppose a lot of the Tartarian and also Egyptian and other things like Easter Island and all these, things down in South America are definitely something humans could not have made, especially if you didn't fly. Some of these things you can't even see properly until you're up in the air 10,000 feet. So there's definitely a lot more going on that we haven't been told. And I think that is another element of what I see with this Saturn-Neptune conjunction coming up in February. And we'll talk more about this, but I wanted to address this because a lot of people have been alarmed. In fact, I've had people in California say, hey, have you heard about this prediction of California falling in the ocean and the West Coast? And of course, that did get my attention. So I do hope I'm interpreting the astrology right. So you got to remember, interrogation astrology is the game of interpretation. The signifactors, which is a fancy word that just means the planets that identify what you're asking about in the houses and signs, have to be looked at very, very carefully. I do get a lot of chaos, subterfuge, and trouble, but I don't know that I get the West Coast falling in the ocean. I remember a while back, everyone was predicting that Japan was going to be just wiped off the map and tsunamis were going to wipe out parts of Southeast Asia and Hawaii, which never happened, though there was an earthquake up in the Alaska area. So it's interesting how, psychics and intuitives they detect this disruption, if you will, in the normal energy fields. And this is what the planets seem to do. They really seem to modulate the divine energy coming in here. And some people will say, well, is it really divine? Well, anyways, I'm looking at a lot of comments here that are now coming through. That's an interesting thing. There could be earthquakes, and I get the Pacific Northwest and the very far upper, you could say, Pacific Rim over in the eastern, what they would call portion, which is above Japan, Russia. See, that whole Pacific Rim comes down and around across Alaska and parallels the West Coast. I'm not again, a geologist, but I can tell you this, they call it a slip fault, where they just keep pushing over the top of one another. So this is, very powerful. There's no question. In fact, I sometimes go to Arizona and I cut down through Palm Springs and I look at my altimeter in the truck and I'm over, I think it's close to 200 feet below sea level. When I'm going down the, I think it's the 114 over there. So it's it's the 86. It's the 86. Runs along the Salton Sea. And I got to tell you, that's kind of creepy when you think about it. I don't even think you can scuba dive 200 feet. So it's pretty far down there. And the whole San Andreas Fault runs down through I think it cuts in right about Oregon and then shoots right down through San Francisco, cuts right through, in fact, the 5 freeway runs right over it. And then you come down and it actually cuts into the, I think it's the Sea of Cortez down by the Salton Sea. You can see it on a map. So there's no question. I get, if we see an earthquake, the best I can tell, and we always see earthquakes here. I get it's going to be a little bit closer to 5 or 6 years from now. And again, I don't know, and I hope I'm right, it doesn't fall into the ocean. So that would be pretty dramatic. At the very least, I think it would break up rather than just slide into the ocean. But anyways, a lot of people are bringing up comments here, and they're saying there was an earthquake over the White House. Yeah, they say there's a fault on the East Coast that's huge. There's another huge fault that runs from Mississippi and where New Orleans is, up the Mississippi riverbed into the Great Lakes. In fact, in the 1800s, there was an earthquake so severe, the Mississippi ran backwards for 2 weeks. So pretty interesting stuff. And I actually had an uncle who had a barge line on the Mississippi, and I'd heard rumors that, that had been talked about for a long, long time. Anyways, interesting stuff. So, we're definitely going to see something with this. And I get it's more subterfuge. Again, I think the empire is going to try and strike back. We could see things attempted with terrorist attacks. Also, I do get there could be some earthquakes. But let's hope I'm right on this. And that's what I wanted to cover today. So a lot of good comments are coming through here. Let's see here. I'm just going to go through a few comments here. I can only stay about a half an hour today. I've got a really busy day, and I'll try and get more timely with these in the future. But a lot of people are saying, someone's saying here something about April. It's hard to concentrate on these when I'm doing this, but someone's saying Mexico is not safe. You bet. I don't get it's California and Oregon. I do see this, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with Lori Torrey, and of course Nostradamus had maps like this too. And I get the very far Pacific Northwest is where it's going to get really bad first before it gets down here. And again, these are very hard to predict, even from a geological standpoint. I know the scientists down here, they've got so many earthquake sensors. It's like Swiss cheese in this state. They've got them everywhere. And, people have their phones. I have it too, where you can actually get earthquake detection. The problem is by the time it detects it, you're in one, and they're fast and they're so unpredictable. And these faults often show up in places they never thought there was a fault. Oh, there's a new fault here, another fault there. So this whole place is extremely detailed in terms of fault lines. And I want to bring up something else. There was another documentary, and I can't recall it right off the top of my head, but it was such a great, I'm going to put it up next podcast. And this is where military guys have been mapping these caverns. There's one right between Catalina and I think it's Laguna Beach. And they have been researching, and they see craft coming in and out of here constantly. And I was teaching a class back in the 1980s at a college, and one of the students said, "My dad's an admiral." And he says, "We've been taking," his father told him, "we've been taking submarines underneath the West Coast, particularly California, all the way to Salt Lake City, and that there's bases underneath there and extraterrestrial bases, all kinds of stuff." And then we've heard also too how there is a huge extraterrestrial opening, or I hate to use that word extraterrestrial, but a base underneath right off of Point Dume, Zuma Beach. If anybody remembers the movie I Dream of Jeannie and Gilligan's Island, a lot of the TV pilots and certain episodes were done out at Point Dume, spelled D-U-M-E. And what's interesting about this is there's this huge cavern underneath there. It used to be on Google. They took it off, right? Can't anybody see it? And there's craft coming in and out of there like crazy. I have seen craft, not so much coming in and out of there, but I've seen a lot of craft in that area out there. So this is something else I think the Saturn Neptune is going to bring. I think we're going to see some disclosure is one of the words used in the UFO community. In other words, acknowledgement. And don't be surprised if even Trump casually admits it. He's more of a businessman. He's more focused on getting the country running and shoveling us out of the pile of debt we're in. And boy, we're in one. And I think there is going to be more and more acknowledgement by quote unquote the government. Even Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, was on that movie, The Age of Disclosure, which I really encourage people to watch. And I'm going to actually be going to another meeting at the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance soon. I think it's coming up here in the next few weeks. And that's going to be a lot of fun because I always rub elbows with a lot of very knowledgeable people who are so excited that this is happening. So I think this is going to be our reality structures are going to be really challenged coming up here. This might be more what the Saturn Neptune is all about. And let's hope that it is. Let's hope, 40 million people don't get killed, because let me tell you, if the West Coast slides in, you're going to have a lot of people gone. So anyways, someone's saying, what is that conjunction else be related to in April when the 6 planets all in tropical Aries at the same time? Yes, it's a good point that this person brought that up. And that's what I was just showing on the screen. There's a huge, 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 huge alignment coming up. And again, these can bring earthquakes. When you get this gravitational pull alone in these very concentrated, degrees of areas of the zodiac, it can cause earthquakes. There's no question about it. And I've seen it. That's exactly what happened in 1994. I'll never forget it. I cast a chart. I'm looking at this and I'm going, we could get an earthquake. And we did. Got a pretty substantial one. They actually downgraded it to 6.7, but I heard reports, and someone in Japan said it was 7.2. And I think it was a lot stronger than 6.7 because there were certain places it just leveled them and other places it didn't. And again, that they said was more of a surface earthquake, not a major slip fault earthquake. Again, if the San Andreas cuts loose, again, what I understand from most geologists, and you can look this up on the internet, is the Pacific plate is pushing under the North American plate, or the other one's doing the other, but they're slipping over one another. And I forget exactly the details. So I'm not so sure, yes, you could see major earthquakes, but sliding in the ocean, I don't know, that would show up in the chart much, much stronger. So anyways, yeah, a lot of people are mentioning Cancun. Yeah, I get this is more east and north is what could happen. And again, we've got the center of the country. There's a lot of very interesting things that can happen with these conjunctions. And something always does happen with these conjunctions. Let me give you an example. The most recent one was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is in 2020. And here's, again, a testimony to the tropical zodiac. In the sidereal zodiac, it happened in the fall of 2019. Well, guess what? The tropical Saturn-Pluto conjunction happened almost to the second the media hit the alarm bell on COVID-19. And boy, did we feel that. We also had what we call a Kalasarpa yoga. All the planets were in between the nodes. So that's a very, very powerful, powerful condition. And I can tell you that we're likely to see some very unusual and strange stuff that's going to happen in this alignment coming up in February. So, yeah, someone's saying there was a retreat in Cancun that I'm thinking of going to. Well, I really rely on interrogation astrology, because you could bet this got my attention when someone said, hey, the West Coast is going to be gone. So I really did look at it very carefully, because I have a lot of friends out here and family, etc. And we want to make sure that, everybody is safe. And again, that would be a mass stampede out of here. Even if you told everybody with 90-degree certainty, you'd probably find 30 million would still be here. They might not leave. So they just get life rafts and life preservers. So yeah, someone is also saying here, a lot of people are mentioning Mexico here. And so again, I get this is more going to be up in the very far Pacific East is what I get, is where it could happen. And it could come down in. And we do have a possibility. There's a number of alignments. We'll be talking more about that as I get further. I can only do so much in these short podcasts. But this is a very powerful, powerful alignment and conjunction. It's not just Saturn and Neptune. You've got a whole bunch of planets, as I showed earlier. You can always go back and watch that and zoom in on that. It's quite an alignment. The thing that concerns me is the exact degree at which it happens shows very dangerous subterfuge. Somebody might try something that really triggers something on society. And that's more what I would detect. And I think you're going to see some very, there's a lot of forces going on. We have what I would call the clash of the titans here in some ways. You've got the new one world order, which you can really see it polarizing. I mean, look what just happened, all this meeting down in Brazil, and the climate change, charge is still going on. You've got the other side of the coin where you've got Trump and all the nationalists trying to keep this sovereign nations going. And this is a big concern in Europe. I hear the same thing in Australia and other countries where they're literally just flooding the borders. And these countries are in danger of actually being destroyed in terms of its original ethnicity. So not that it's bad that any ethnicity comes in, but when it's uncontrolled mass migration like that, remember I had always mentioned the Cloward Plivet, create uncontrollable bureaucracy so you can't get anything done, create uncontrollable debt and so you can't pay it back, and last but not least, uncontrollable migration. This is how you destroy democratic or democracy type societies or Western, capitalistic societies. And this is exactly what's been going on since 2020. The Saturn Pluto conjunction wasn't just COVID. It was a massive attempt at destroying and really taking down for these agendas that we hear about, Agenda 230 and all this stuff. So this is deep stuff. And it's interesting how the NWO people and some of these very high-level people in banking follow this stuff. They follow these cycles in astrology, and they certainly act on them, I can tell you that. So I had an interesting conversation with a gentleman the other day about that. Do they follow this stuff? My opinion is absolutely. And I've had a lot of people in high-level places be concerned about these astrological trigger points. That's a lot to it. So I got to keep it short here today because I have a place I have to go. And but this is really something I wanted to address, and we'll talk about it more as I get into more podcasts. And I'm going to be having some more guests on. I just haven't had it happen lately. I've been invited on other shows and taking it there. Someone's saying, I believe that's why Tesla wanted tech so badly, mainly to take down the ET crafts in the radar. Yeah, it's used not for our safety, but it's always claimed to be government use and technocracy weapons. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. Elon Musk is reported to have owned or does own one of the largest underground tunneling companies in the world. They actually bore huge tunnels under the ground. And this might sound crazy to some people, but to others it won't. I hear there is high-speed magnetic tunnels under the ground connecting bases all over the place. Pretty wild stuff. And again, this is not stuff I've heard from one person. I've heard it for years from several different reliable sources. A lot of stuff going on this planet that we don't know about. And this is what I think is more probable with this Neptune-Saturn conjunction. A lot of things is going to get disclosed. Our reality is going to dissolve. And let's hope our land masses don't dissolve. So with that, I have to run. And thanks for joining me. This is a brief one, but Chris Bledsoe is going to come on. He's just been busy. I've been busy. We haven't been able to connect, but really want to talk to Chris because, as you know, he's actually talking to people in the government, and he's had so many craft come to him. He's got messages that he gets, and a very interesting guy. He wrote the book UFO of God. So going to have him back on soon, and some other really interesting guests here coming up soon. By the way, I put up a new website. So if anybody goes to my website, jeff@jeffharmon.com, you can check it out. Also, I have a whole new section on gemstones, and it's some really exciting stuff you can watch on there. And again, I've been really busy doing talismanic gemstones for people, which is setting the gem, natural untreated gems, to a person's birth chart and having them charge it. And it's amazing. I have some excellent stories I want to talk about on gems in the future. I had one person just had a gem and told me it really shifted a health issue, which was interesting. Not that I'm saying gems will cure anything, but they really do balance your energy. So it's very powerful. And I can tell you after, 35, 40 years of gemstones, I can tell you, I really can feel it when I take gems off and on. I can really feel it, especially when you wear them for like 6 months or more. Absolutely amazing. So anyways, with that, I've got to run, and thanks for joining me. And I wish I could answer more of the questions as usual, but we'll be talking to you soon next week. Have a great, again, rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you probably on Wednesday. Thanks so much.